Good day, good morning, good evening. Today is Tuesday, the 14th of September, and my name is Claudia ten Hafe, and I'm joined today again by my colleagues Anna, Richard, and also Lynn, in fact, to take you to the second of our four-set series on national reporting. You see displayed now the flyer for this particular session. The session today and the session on Thursday are sessions specific to the online reporting, to the reporting guidance. In other words, the draft reporting guidance that is there to help you in the online reporting that is due by the end of this year. We'll take you step by step through this, and it gives me indeed great pleasure to introduce my colleagues, Richard Gutierrez and Ana Garcia, who will also speak after me. And with that, we can start with the first slide. So our session today is in 5 segments. It is quite an information-rich session, and at times you will find there is more information on the slide than you could immediately absorb. I'd like to just reassure you that all the information that you are seeing on slides today is also clearly indicated and included in the draft reporting guidance. So should there be anything that you do not have enough time to absorb or to take down, please be assured that it's all there. And of course, all of the slides are being made available at the conclusion of this session. Let me also just say that the session is, of course, recorded, so you may want to re-watch a part that might be helpful to you or recommend it to a colleague that might be helping you in national reporting. And all of these recordings, by the end of this set, we'll have 4 recordings, are all captured also on the website of the Minamata Convention. But for today, I will very shortly just outline the reporting requirements as per Article 21. We spent much time of this in last week's session, so this will only be a small indication. And then I would like to go into the presentation. Well, then I'm here now in the presentation structure. My colleague Anna will speak to you about the online reporting tool, and then Richard and sometimes me will take you through the first part of the questions, namely for Article 3, 4, 5, and 7. We will have a small stop at the end just to reiterate the importance and the role of the national focal point, and then we hope there's also a bit of time left for any questions that you might already have. May I also invite you to put any questions in the chat box or comments in the chat box, that as we go along we might see them, and we might even be able to weave in here and there already a response as we speak to the different questions. But for now, let me go to the next slide. And the next. Just to highlight again that, of course, all parties are to report on a regular basis as per Article 21. And this report is not only a matter of reporting on the implementation progress of that party, but also any information forthcoming in terms of the effectiveness of the measures being implemented, as well as possible challenges that the party faces. Reporting happens every 2 years in a way. Every 2 years is 4 questions of the full reporting format that are to be answered, and every 4 years are all the questions in the reporting format. We therefore speak of short reports and full reports, and the first set of short reports were submitted by parties already by December 2019, and with a very tremendous reporting rate, which is terrific. And now parties are preparing to submit their full reports by the end of this year. In other words, responses to all 43 questions. Next slide. What is specific to today's session and also the session on Thursday is that we will be presenting to you the draft guidance that was prepared for full national reporting. This guidance was requested to be prepared at the 3rd meeting of the Conference of the Parties. The Conference of the Parties requested the Secretariat to prepare this guidance to help clarify the information that is being sought in these 43 questions and the remainder of the reporting format. Just to highlight what we also mentioned last week, this reporting guidance is not a manual on how to implement the convention. It is simply an information piece that parties could use and could lean on to enable them to collate and collect the information they need to make the responses that are being requested by the reporting format. The draft guidance is already available on the website of the Minamata Convention. It is document 17. This draft guidance will go formally to the COP, and the COP will formally deliberate on it. But in its decision 313, the COP already requested parties to use the draft guidance on a provisional basis in the preparation of their national reports. And this session today and the next one is part of trying to support parties in this endeavor. Next slide. What we will be doing is taking you through the articles 3, 4, 5, and 7. And those 4 articles already comprise 21 of the questions that national focal points will be responding to. So it's quite a bulky set of information in the first 21 questions of the national report. I just want to highlight, of course, that that almost all questions are either a yes or no, begin with a yes or no, and thereafter there's a type of flow chart that will perhaps ask subsequent questions of parties to fill in. The draft guidance is prepared in such a way that after the question, there are first some notes on that particular question, on the article, etc., and thereafter a suggested approach of how to go about answering those questions. And we will be presenting that today here. Just a short note on the different icons that you will see. We are trying to give you some hints along the way, also where, for example, attachments need to be prepared. So there's a little suitcase for that, because that may take a bit more time to prepare. So just for your early heads up of that as well. There are some notes along the way, which you will see. And here and there's a reminder of something that is important just to keep in mind. Right after this, we will turn to Anna to give you a small update on the online reporting tool. But I think I have one more slide. Next one, please. Just to reiterate that, of course, we concentrate now in the reporting guidance on the 43 questions that national reporting entails, but that the entire reporting format that was adopted in Decision 1.8 in COP1 contains 5 parts. Part 1 is simply the contact information and other relevant information about the party. Part B contains these 43 questions, but very important is also to highlight that there's a part C, which is an opportunity to comment on possible challenges. There's also a supplementary part D, where parties may comment on the reporting format. And then there is also a possibility of a part E that provides the opportunity to add comments in free text that the party may want to add and didn't find space to in the structure of the questions. With that, that is the introduction. And if I could hand over to my colleague, Ana Garcia, for the next bit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claudia. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Before we go into some updates on the online reporting tool, we'll play the kickoff video again to give a sneak peek at the reporting process. Shariful, please, if you can put the video. Thank you. I don't know if Shariful, if I can share the screen. Okay, you have it. Thank you very much. We can go back to the presentation. I hope that this gives you like this sneak peek and a whole overview on the process to start preparing your reports. If we go back now to the presentation, the next slide shows you, next slide, please. The other one. Okay. This is a reminder of the main steps your party is going through in preparing national reports. Step one, we announced the cycle last week. Secondly, you have already received the login credentials to login into the tool. If not, please reach the Secretariat and we will provide them to your national focal point. And now we are in step three. We all hope that all national focal points can start working on the report. Then you will complete and submit it. The Secretariat will review the report. And finally, we will have the full national reports for this cycle. Next one, please. This is a quick summary on how to start working on the reports. Once you log in into the system, you will find in the main screen the draft guidance that Claudia mentioned and the user guide. Please check both documents before starting. You need to fill in all parts and questions in order to be able to submit your national report. And we have ensured that your progress is automatically saved when you move to a new step or when you press the Save button. We encourage you to press Save Drafts, especially when adding attachments. The reporting tool has been built following an incremental model. That means that we are currently improving and adding more functionalities to help parties in their obligation, even if the tool is now completed. Next one, please. Here you have some of the major updates you will see soon on the reporting tool. Even if we advise you to move step by step through each article in sequence, we are very much aware of the complexity of the full national reports. Therefore, we have implemented a functionality that allows you to start from any article, as you can see on the screenshot, and follow a non-linear path. The information is saved if you change from one screen to another one. Next one, please. An offline paper version of the full report will be also downloadable from the online tool to help national focal points prepare their submission. You can collect and collate notes there in advance before filling in responses in the online reporting tool. But the Secretariat, of course, encourages parties to use the online reporting tool to submit national reports. Because doing so, data will be stored in our database and it facilitates processing and analysis. I will stop here now and follow up with you on the online reporting tool during our next meeting on Thursday with a demo session on how the platform works. Now, over to you, Richard, for the following slides. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anna, and good day, good evening, and welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us again. As my colleagues have mentioned, we'll be covering a lot of ground today, and I'll be starting with Article 3, Mercury Supply Sources and Trade. Next slide, please. Right. So as discussed earlier, each of the as we cover each of these articles, will provide you with an overview of what the article is. We will not be discussing in detail what the articles require, but focus rather on the reporting side of it. But the overview will just give you a flavor of what the article is, just to remind you, and then we'll proceed with the reports or the reporting questions. So Article 3, if you will recall, this contains control measures to limit the global supply of mercury. It also complements and reinforces demand reduction control measures, which is covered in under Articles 4 to 7. And also, it outlines procedures to follow for trade in elemental mercury. Next slide, please. As a quick reminder, if you will note, the main sources of mercury supply are, as indicated here in the slide, are in Articles 3 to 4, the primary mined mercury, which must be phased out, and no new mines are supposed to be allowed. Article 3, 5A to your right is another source of mercury stocks, which under the convention, the parties must endeavor to identify large stocks of mercury and mercury supply. And there's a guidance that's been adopted in COP1. And then the final box that you will see in the slide corresponds to Article 3, 5B, mercury from decommissioned chloralkali plants, wherein the use of mercury in the chloralkali production is under the convention must be phased out by 2025. Closed plants leave behind very large quantities of mercury, and parties must take measures to ensure proper disposal of the excess mercury. Now, next slide, please. Now, this is the, if you will recall, the icons that was presented earlier. When you see the icon right before the 3.1, that represents the online reporting tool. So this is what you will see, how the question will look like in the online reporting tool. So to start off under question 3.1, does the party have any primary mercury mines that were operating within its territory at the date of entry into force of the convention of the party for the party? As Claudia mentioned earlier, most of the questions are either a yes or no. And as you will see here, it branches out. So it's pretty cut and dry. It is whether party has these primary mercury mines or not. Now, for those parties that do not have primary mercury mines that were operating at the date of entry into force of the convention for it, the party would reply no by checking the box and moving forward to the next questions. To the next question. For the parties that have primary mercury mines, um, you are requested, if you may, please indicate the anticipated date of closure for the mines or the date when the mines were closed. And importantly, the total amount mined per metric tons per year. A couple of notes for this question. Question 3.1 does not seek information about mines which mercury is obtained as a byproduct or waste. It just talks about the elemental mercury. Paragraph 11 of Article 3 also requires each party to include in its report submitted pursuant to Article 21 all information showing that the requirements of these articles have been met. So now, one last item here, and we've noted in the short national reports, feel free to use Part C, especially when you encounter or when you want, if you have data for partial years that can be included in the full years, or if the full year of data is not available, please utilize Part C in providing these additional information. Next slide, please. Question 3.2. Does the party have any primary mercury mines that are now in operation that were not in operation at the time of entry into force of the convention for the party? Again, the question branches out to a yes or no answer. Again, if the party does not have primary mercury mines, the party would reply no and would move on to the next question. If a party has the response yes, the questionnaire prompts the party to please explain. Note that paragraph 3 of Article 3 requires each party to not allow primary mercury mining that was not being conducted within its territory at the date of the entry into force of the convention for it. Now, what could the explanation contain? The explanation can contain the number of mines, the dates the mines commenced operation, whether the mines are formal or informal, the total amount of mercury metal produced by primary mercury mining, and proposed actions to meet the obligations in paragraph 3 of Article 3. And of course, you can also include the anticipated closure dates for the mines. Keep in mind that we need to be consistent in terms of our units of measures, which is in metric tons, when answering the questionnaire. And lastly, as a reminder again, the party may also wish to provide additional explanations or further information in Part C of the questionnaire. Next slide, please. Question 3.3. Has the party endeavored to identify individual stocks of mercury or mercury compounds exceeding 50 metric tons and sources of mercury supply generating stocks exceeding 10 metric tons per year that are located within its territory? If the party answers no, you are requested to please explain your answer. If the party responds yes, the following things are being requested. First, to kindly attach results of your endeavor or indicate where it is available on the internet, unless unchanged from previous reporting rounds. A supplemental request is also being forwarded to please provide any related information, for example, the use or disposal of mercury from such stocks or sources. Now, in the short national reports, there's been we've seen that some countries sort of struggle with this question, in that we've often seen parties indicating no. Now, we all, again, in this instance, we invite parties to utilize Part C if it wishes to explain a bit more further what the responses or what their specific response is, whether it's a yes or a no to this question. Now, just to elaborate a little bit on some scenarios with regard to question 3.3. Now, if the party has attempted to identify stocks and sources, but is unable to complete the task, or the party has completed the task but is not yet comprehensive or conclusive, what we would recommend to the parties to answer yes and provide the explanation as an attachment or in Part C. Now, if the party has been trying to do the identification of stocks and sources, but is unable to complete the task, you may wish to include in your explanation the anticipated date of completion or the reason behind the reason preventing the completion of the task. Now, if the party has attempted to identify stocks and sources, but the results are not conclusive, then you could do again, provide us an additional explanation on proposed steps that the party will take to conclude the task, or to add additional steps or elaborate on the further steps that the parties may wish to take to attach the results of the assessment. Now, lastly, in a situation where the party has attempted to identify and has determined that there's none, that there is no stocks, you could just immediately put it as an attachment or provide clarification in Part C, or I forgot to mention as well, Part E, in which parties may in free text provide additional information or explanation under the reporting format. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a reminder to the national focal points that there has been a guidance that's been adopted under decision MC 1/2, the guidance on the identification of individual stocks of mercury or mercury compounds exceeding 50 metric tons and sources of mercury supply generating stocks exceeding 10 metric tons per year. We find this in the link provided below. And just a couple of quick notes. The guidance clarifies that a stock does not include quantities of mercury disposed of or managed as waste, and that nor mercury at a contaminated site, nor geologic reserves. So, and then individual stocks would be identified in the aggregate weight of mercury or mercury compounds exceeding 50 metric tons. It also includes existing inventories or stockpiles of governments, traders, or operating chloralkali facilities. Next slide, please. Okay, so this just provides you with general information, which is found in the guidance document. examples of one or more actions of which the parties can take in terms of undertaking the endeavor. For example, specific survey of Mercury, implementation of the National Hazardous Substances Regulations, development of the party's implementation plan, or development of the Minamata initial assessment. Next slide, please. All right. In question 3.4, the question asks, does the party have excess mercury available from the decommissioning of chloralkali facilities? In this question, it's another yes or no question. If the party has chloralkali, has excess mercury from decommissioned chloralkali facilities, and they answer yes, the questionnaire prompts the party to please explain the measures taken to ensure that the excess mercury was disposed of in accordance with the guidelines for environmentally sound management referred to in paragraph 3A of Article 11, using operations that did not lead to recovery, recycling, reclamation, direct reuse, or alternative uses. So this is essentially final disposal. If the party does not have the chloralkali facilities that have been decommissioned, it would reply no and move to the next question. Now, a couple of points for those parties who may answer, who may be answering yes. Now, if the party has chloralkali facilities that have been decommissioned, and the party has not made a determination accordingly, the party may the party might will not be responding yes or no, but it would be better to provide an explanation in Part C and then could add any other information in Part E. So in cases where the party has determined that there is no excess mercury available from the decommissioning, the party would reply no. And then the party, in certain instances where the party has determined there is excess mercury available from that decommissioning, the party would reply yes and provide an explanation of the measures taken pursuant to paragraph 5B of Article 3. Next slide, please. All right. So when a couple of notes, when a chloralkali plant is decommissioned, the party may determine that the mercury that becomes available from the decommissioning is excess to its requirements. If the party makes this determination, again, the party must make sure that such mercury is disposed of in accordance with paragraph 3 of Article 11. In this instance, we've also like to remind the parties and all of you who are listening right now that there's a technical guidelines on the environmentally sound management of mercury waste that has been developed by the Basel Convention and in pursuant to paragraph 3A of Article 11. A copy of that is available on the Minamata Convention website in the link provided below. Next slide, please. It's Article 3.6 to 10, trade. So for this section, I will be transferring or handing the reins over to Claudia to continue with the discussion.
Thank you very much, Richard. It is indeed a lot of information we are giving you, but to dive right in, I will be telling you a little bit about the two questions on trade. The first question is question 3.5, and you will notice an asterisk next to this question. And just as an explanatory note, this asterisk you will find 4 times in the entire reporting format because there are 4 questions that are answered in the short reports. Whereas there are 43 questions that are answered in the full reports. So this is one question that has already been answered by all the parties that prepared and submitted their national reports in December 2019 and will be very familiar to national focal points, I'm sure, for more than one reason, the one being reporting, but also the other being that national focal points have a special role when it comes to the consent forms of trade. So let me read the question 3.5. Has the party received consent or relied on a general notification of consent in accordance with Article 3, including any required certification from importing non-parties for all exports of mercury from the party's territory in the reporting period. This question is, as it indicates here, for Article 3 and specifically for paragraphs 6 and 7. And so parties would here need to answer whether they have received consent, not whether they have traded, but whether they have received consent to export. And if they have, they would say yes if they have exported to parties, or yes if they have exported to non-parties. There's also the option to say no if you have not received consent. I want to just highlight one small lesson we learned from the last reporting period, is that for parties that have not exported anything and therefore also had no reason to seek consent, there is no specific button to choose right now to say we have not exported and therefore did not need to rely on any consent. As this button is not currently part of the approved reporting format, we would like you to simply indicate so in part E of that question, where you can simply state in free text that you do not export any mercury and therefore did not need to receive any consent, whether by forms or by or look for the general notification of consent by the party. So here, if we are now speaking to those parties that do export mercury and that have received consent, if they have answered yes, just to check that they have also forwarded copies of the consent forms to the Secretariat. If they have, they simply answer yes and move on. If they have not, to please at this opportunity attach the forms that they have received for consent. This is part of the guidance given by COP1, that all forms that are utilized are to be sent in copy or by copy afterwards to the Secretariat. So if you have been able to, if you have used this procedure, kindly ensure that those consent forms reach the Secretariat either as you conduct this particular trade or at the reporting time, which now would be for the last 4 years. If there is a need to present the information in another way rather than the forms, please do so in keeping in mind that all relevant information that is currently on the form would need to be part of that package to send to the Secretariat, so that all of the requirements as part of that consent are clearly notified. For this question, there is also a supplemental question. In other words, this is not a mandatory question, and it is up to the parties to voluntarily give this answer. Having said so, the instructions from COP1 were to consider all supplemental questions also as important for the information exchange. So the information that you can provide would be most valuable for the further development, of course, of the convention. And here it is to provide information on the use of the exported mercury. And moving on to 3B of that question, if the exports were based on general notifications, then to indicate the amount of mercury exported and any other terms and conditions as per the general notification. If I may move to the next slide. What this all entails, and these are the notes that you will see in the draft guidance, is that, of course, this question 3.5 relates solely to the export of mercury. It is not about mercury added products. It is not about mercury waste. It's not even about mercury compounds. It is about mercury. The forms, and you can find the link here or on our website, the forms are downloadable from our website, as is the guidance passed by COP1 on how to use the forms. And there's more information here in terms of also the written consent and for the allowed purposes. If I may move to the next slide. Here is just, and I realize it's far too small to read, but just as an overview for those that maybe don't usually deal with trade matters, there is a Form A, which is the provision of written consent by a party to import the mercury. B is a form for the provision of written consent by a non-party to the import of mercury, and D is the general notification of consent to import mercury. Let me just say that D, a couple, but not that many parties have submitted general notifications of consent, and these are available on our website. So traders would, or those that would like to export and import mercury, could have a look what the conditions are for the counterpart party in terms of whether the forms D are applicable or whether the forms A or B are applicable. Next slide. Here is just the notes that the decision 1.2 of the COP, in other words, one of the very first decisions of the COP, gives you the guidance in terms of how to fill out the forms and also what to do next with the forms. And all of this is described in some detail in the draft reporting guidance. Next slide. There's a second question under trade, namely 3.6. Has the party allowed the import of mercury from a non-party? Here it is, of course, a matter of keeping the same regime as if it were from import from a party. And so here a party would either answer yes, it has allowed the import of mercury, or no, it has not allowed the import of mercury from a non-party. If yes, very similar to the previous instance, it is a matter of have the forms been sent to the Secretariat, of copies, not the original, but copies of the forms been sent to the Secretariat, and this provides a check. Has this happened? If it has, terrific. If it didn't happen at the time of national reporting, to kindly do so here, as it is recommended by the COP to send this to the Secretariat. And there is also for this question a supplemental question, and what I outlined earlier in terms of supplemental questions applies here too. It is not mandatory, but it's very much encouraged to answer this if indeed you did, as a party, import mercury from a non-party, and it is to provide information on the quantity of mercury that is being imported and the country of origin of that mercury. And you can see the detail here in terms of whether the party has relied on paragraph 7 of Article 3 and so on. And if I may get to the next slide. So in a nutshell, as the notes in the draft guidance outline, this question relates to the export of mercury. You will see all of the details here also again in terms of the forms and the written consent, and also that the export would be for allowable purposes. And if I may move to the next slide. Just again to show you that in this scenario, it would be forms A and C, because a non-party exporting country would use form C. There are 4 forms in total, form A, B, C, or D, depending on the situation that the party finds itself in. Moving on to the next slide. I will talk about the next set of questions as well, which are the questions related to mercury added products, and this is distinct from the movement or so of mercury. In this section, there are in fact 5 questions, and so I do not want to take very much time, but you could always refer back to these slides and also to the guidance. But just to give the overview, it is of course that Article 4 is accompanied by Annex A, and in this Annex A are 2 parts. The first part relates to a number of products such as batteries, switches, lamps, cosmetics, pesticides, and a number of non-electronic measuring devices. And part 2 relates to dental amalgam. These in total being some of the most important mercury added products. And the provision of the convention is that they shall not be allowed to be manufactured, imported, or exported after a certain date. And here you see it as 2020. Next slide. At the top of that annex are a number of exclusions, just quickly highlighted for you here. There are in total 5 exclusions for which products are still allowed. Next slide. But coming to the first of the 5 questions, has the party taken appropriate measure to not allow the manufacture, import, or export of mercury added products listed in Part A of Part 1 of Annex A after the phase-out date specified for those products? A party would either say yes or no. And I'll get to in a moment to the fact that a party or a very limited number of parties may say that yes, but they are implementing paragraph 2. But the large majority of parties to the Minamata Convention would either say yes or no, that they have taken measures. Yes, they have taken measures, and they are then invited to provide information on that measure, on those measures taken, or no, they have not taken measures, and there could be more than one reason for this. The one could be that the party may have registered an exemption to this 2020 timeline as per Article 6 for some time. And if so, the party would answer yes or no and would list the products that it has requested an exemption for. As I mentioned, it could be that your party has, your government or the party has decided to implement a paragraph 2 of Article 4, in which case one would simply immediately go to question 4.2. But before I go to question 4.2, if I can have the next slide. Here is a list. Again, it probably is too small unless you have a very big screen in front of you, but these are some of the products that are listed, and the party, if it has requested exemption and obtained exemption from some of them for the particular deadline of 2020, would list or tick them here. Next slide. So if the party has taken the appropriate measures, the guidance provides for some notes and some descriptions forward in terms of what to add. It could be descriptions of the measures. It could be the dates the measures were taken, or when they are taking effect, or when they, if they have already taken effect. And there may also be other matters that the party, if it is party to the Rotterdam, may also wish to reference in this regard. Next slide. If the party has not taken measures, it would reply no. And as mentioned, there could be more than one reason. It could be that it is answering no because it has asked for an exemption, and then the rest of the question tree would apply. Or it could say no because it simply has not been able to implement these provisions yet. In this case, the party would say no, but it would provide some further information under Part C, which is the part that seeks further information on the challenges that the party is encountering in meeting this obligation. It could also be that a party is a bit between both of these answers. In other words, that it has taken some measures or that it has and got some exemptions. And so the other boxes that you have around Part C and Part E, where information can be provided in free text, are valuable places to add this other information and to make it more and better understood by the Secretariat and ultimately the Conference of the Parties of the progress that the party has achieved so far, or perhaps the challenges that the party sees in progressing in its progress on this obligation. Moving to the next slide. I mentioned that very few parties are probably implementing paragraph 2, but just to highlight it here, most parties would probably skip this particular question and move right onto 4.3. And in fact, if you are in the online reporting system, you will only see this question if you have actually answered, we are implementing paragraph 2. So if you don't see it, it's probably because you're not implementing it, but there is guidance in the some guidance in the reporting, the draft reporting guidance on how to reply in this regard. And in a nutshell, the question asks if the party has reported to the conference at its first opportunity a description of the measures or strategies implemented, including a quantification of the reductions received. And then, as projected here, the rest of the question tree follows. And if I may move to the next question. The next slide. So, as mentioned earlier, there are two parts to the annex, and with questions 4.3, we are landing at the second part of the annex, which is the annex part, which is the part on dental amalgam. And the question is, has the party taken 2 or more measures for mercury added products listed in part 2 of the annex? As mentioned, this is, and the notes there with the little icon reflected, currently the only mercury added product that is listed in part 2 is dental amalgam, and so the party would answer yes or no. If it has taken 2 or more measures, it would absolutely say yes and could provide extra information on those measures. If a party has not taken 2 or more measures, it would reply no and would provide may wish to provide an explanation of such in part C. In other words, what are the challenges in meeting this obligation? And as mentioned, any other information can also be fit into part E in free text if the party wishes to do so. And we move on to the next question. There are 2 more for Article 4 and mercury added products, and I will race through them because we still have quite a few articles to go. But the party would also need to answer, has the party taken measures to prevent the incorporation into assembled products of mercury added products whose manufacturer, import or export are not allowed under Article 4? Again, a yes and no, and the rest of the guidance and the decision tree should guide the party forward in terms of the information that's required here. And very shortly, question 4.5. Has the party discouraged the manufacture and distribution in commerce of mercury added products not covered by any known use in accordance with this article? Again, it would be yes or no, and following the decision tree or the question tree of this, and providing extra information where it can be. With that, we land at the next article, Article 5, manufacturing processes. And I hand over to Richard, who I know will have to do a lot of presenting in a very short time. So perhaps we will, for this point, simply almost flip through, because we would also like to just have some opportunity for some questions after. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Claudia. For Article 5, we are looking at, as you will recall, we are looking at processes, manufacturing processes in which mercury or mercury compounds are used. And the control measure is found in Annex B, in which for Part 1, processes that are listed in Part 1 of Annex B are designated for phase out. And for Part 2, restrictions or measures need to be applied for processes that are listed thereunder. The next slide, please. Now, each party is endeavored to identify facilities within its territory, to identify facilities that use mercury or mercury compounds listed in Annex B, and to submit those to the Secretariat no later than 3 years after the date of entry into force for the convention for it. Now, in the series of questions that follows, it essentially tries to determine whether these facilities exist, and if it falls under Part 1 or Part 2, Part 2 of Annex B, whether measures have been taken by the party. So in particular, for 5.1, we're looking at if the party has determined that it has facilities in its territory that use mercury or mercury compounds listed in Annex B, and it answers yes, it is required to provide information to the measures taken to address the emissions releases of mercury from the facilities, and if available, to provide information on the numbers and types of facilities estimated for the annual amount. And then also finally, the party is requested to provide information on how much mercury is used in the process listed. And if this does not apply to the party, or if the party has undertaken the process of identifying but the results are not complete, they could respond no or do not know and provide an explanation in part C. Next slide, please. Now, for questions 5.2 and 5.3, these are quite similar, in which it is, the process is listed, and the options for the parties are provided. So the options are either yes, no, or not applicable. Now, I think the more critical part is when to respond to not applicable. So, so it's suggested that if the party has replied no, if the party has measures in place to phase out chloralkali facilities by 2025 and they replied yes, please provide the additional information as required in question 5.2. If the party has a registered exemption under Article 6, the party will reply yes and list the processes to which it has registered exemptions. Now, if the party has not registered for an exemption pursuant to Article 6, that's when you check no. Now, if the party has replied no to either of the first two questions and has not registered for an exemption, it may wish to provide that explanation in Part C. So the not applicable will apply to those parties that do not have chloralkali production facilities or acetaldehyde production facilities in their jurisdiction. Next slide, please. So 5.3 is similar. The main difference, the main point is that the vinyl chloride monomer production, sodium potassium methylate, and ethylate production, and the production of polyurethane using mercury-containing catalyst are subject to Article 5, Paragraph 3, and are listed in Part 2 of Annex B with specific provisions. Now, if the party does have facilities that use mercury or mercury compounds in the process listed in Part 2 of Annex B, the party would reply yes, and as appropriate, provide information such as the measures taken pursuant to Annex B, Part 2 of Annex B, the date of implementation of the measures, and the effectiveness of the measures. If the party has replied no, again, if the party has replied no to one or more parts of the question, or if the party has replied yes but has not taken measures provided in Part 2, and the party may wish to provide in Part C an explanation why it has not taken such measures. Next slide, please. In question 5.4, if the party has a facility that did not exist prior to the entry force of the convention, and that the facility is using mercury or mercury compounds in the manufacturing process listed in Annex B, the party would reply yes. And then provide the following, the information that I mentioned previously. Next slide, please. In Article 5.4, is there any mercury compounds in a facility using the manufacturing process? Again, it's a yes or a no. And if you answer yes, certain information is required. The additional guidance on how to respond to these questions can be found in the draft guidance, in the draft reporting guidance. I'll jump on to, and there's also one more last question in the manufacturing process, but I beg your indulgence, but I'll just jump into the last article, Article 7 on ASGM. If I can just quickly go over that for you. So I'll skip the overview. So this applies only to countries that have artisanal small-scale gold mining, which has been determined that is more than insignificant and that uses mercury. There are 5 questions for Article 7. The key things to remember is that at least for, next slide, please, sorry. Next slide. So even for 7.1, have steps been taken to reduce or to eliminate mercury in ASGM? So if it applies, yes, and then countries requested to provide information, additional information. If this question does not apply to the party, it can move to the next question. So in addressing the remainder of Article 7, You can find details of these on how to respond to these questions, again, in the draft reporting guidance. Before I hand over the microphone to my colleague, I'll just prompt Shariful, can you go to slide 57, please? So this is in question 7.4, it requires the party to please attach recent review that's completed under Article 7. So this is part of the regular review process required under the convention. And in the next slide, it's a supplemental information requirement, or a supplemental information. It's not mandatory, but it just simply asks if the party has cooperated with other countries or agencies in achieving the objective of this article. So I just wanted to flag that because that, again, although not mandatory, it provides useful information in the implementation of the convention. I'm sorry for this abbreviated walkthrough on Article 7, but I now pass on the mic to my colleague, Lynn or Claudia. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you for the indulgence of our listeners and participants today. There is so much information to try to submit. We just want to conclude very quickly on one point, which is the role of the national focal point. And let me just go immediately to the next slide, because there's a special role of the national focal point, both in reporting, but also, as mentioned earlier, also in some other provisions, such as under Article 3. But here, just for you to locate that in Article 17, paragraph 4, it is written that each party shall designate a national focal point for the exchange of information under this convention. And the national reports is one of the most important parts of this exchange of information. As mentioned last week, all national focal points that we have on our database received the notification of the online reporting system being open, and also their personalized credentials to access. We have received some bounces, so there must be some national focal points that might not be in place. And so if you are a party that feels that the information has not reached you, please immediately get in contact, and Lynn will show you just now, just to see where on the website you can do so to check that the correct national focal point is on record with the Convention Secretariat for all of these steps. So over to Lynn, please.
Thank you very much, Claudia. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. It is my pleasure to walk you through where to find the national focal point information on our website. So as you can see on the screen now, it is the national focal point webpage. You can find the information on the national focal point to the Minamata Convention by clicking in the drop-down menu. The information to complete the formalities of such a designation can also be found on the website as well. Moving on to the next slide. It is the form and the model letters for the designation of the national focal point under the convention, and this form should be completed and returned under the cover of the official nomination letters from the government official contact point to the United Nations Environment Program, or from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or from the permanent mission to the UN in Geneva, or to the UN Environment Program, to the attention of the Executive Secretary of the Minamata Convention on Mercury, as you can see on the screen. And please note that the self-nomination cannot be considered. If you have any question on the designation of national focal point, please send an email to our Secretariat mailbox. And thank you, and over to you, Claudia.
Thank you, and only with a moment to spare, there's just the next slide, which just is the target date for completing the full national reports. And the next slide, just to remind of all the different resources that are there. Shariful, if I can have the next slide. On our forms and guidance page on the website, you will find the forms and guidance as agreed and adopted at the first COP. And also in the online reporting tool will be the draft reporting guidelines. There will be links to the draft reporting guidance, I beg your pardon. I think that is about it that we wanted to transmit to you in a very, very full hour. We are set to hopefully meet you and many more on Thursday for the other articles that form the remainder of the question set. So the next slide will show you the full package of the 4 sessions that we have prepared on national reporting. Last week was the first one to get us started. This week are 2 deep dives into different parts of the reporting guidance. And then on the 22nd of November, 40 days before the deadline, we are here for you in 2 different time zone times for any questions that you may have or have encountered at that stage to enable you to submit all of your reports in time. I didn't see any more specific questions, but I did want to just acknowledge that it seems there was an error in our advanced copy of the guidelines, because a very important part of the guidance somehow seems to have gone missing. So thank you very much for Yoshizaki-san for pointing that out. We will check on that immediately. It must have happened in the processing of the document. It was not that the version that was earlier circulated for parties meant to exclude that. So we will ensure that the corrected version is up ASAP so that you have the full text of the suggested action also for question 3.5, which is indeed the one of the questions under Article 3. With that, and if I don't see any other burning question, I would like to just thank you again for your time. An hour of your time is a lot of time and very valuable to us. So thank you very much. And should you come across any other questions or anything you'd like us to do more of or differently or anything for Thursday, please feel free to just drop us an email and we shall try to adjust also for that. With that, stay well. And on behalf of all of us here at the Secretariat, sending you our best until we meet again on Thursday. Bye-bye.